I've roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast. The definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
In the old days, every distillery in Scotland malted its own barley, with a team of men shoveling the damp grain to turn it as each kernel began to sprout, essential to making the starches inside those kernels available to be converted into alcohol during mashing and fermenting, then drying the grain in a kiln to stop the germination process, with the smoke from a peat fire not only providing the heat, but infusing the grain with its smoky flavor. The pagodas originally designed by architect Charles Doig were the chimneys for those kilns, but only a handful of distilleries in Scotland still have floor maltings today. Almost all of the malted barley used to make Scotch whisky now comes from one of the 11 commercial maltings in Scotland, like Diageo's Port Ellen Maltings on Islay. It opened in 1973, just up the hill from the old Port Ellen distillery.
You can see the two old pagodas that are still there.
The distillery closed in 1983, but the peat smoke from the maltings still permeates the air around Port Ellen most days. This isn't one of them, because it's one of the rare days when the maltings is producing unpeated malt for blending use.
The vast majority of what we do is peated batches, obviously that's what we're all about. There is a distillery just now that has requested a couple of unpeated batches, which is key because when you're blending, so when we come to talk about phenol in blending, if you have very, very high phenol, everything that's coming off kiln here is a 50 phenol, say, and someone wants a low phenol, a 20 phenol, we need to blend that down. So we're actually putting away just now 2 unpeated batches, so I'm terribly sorry, that's highly unusual.
Islay doesn't grow much barley, about 1,500 tons a year, enough to feed the demand from the Port Ellen maltings for about 3 weeks. But what Islay does have is peat in spades. The maltings uses 6 tons of peat for every batch of grain, 11 batches of grain a week, and there's enough peat on Islay to last into the next millennium. That's why it made sense to build the maltings in Port Ellen.
It's a logistical nightmare building a maltings on Islay, but they did it.
Colin Gordon manages the maltings and keeps an eye on the old distillery's warehouses, still used to mature casks of Lagavulin from up the road. At its heart, his team still malts barley the same way distilleries used to do it. They just make a lot more of it, a lot more efficiently. When the grain comes in off a barge from the Scottish mainland, its moisture content is around 12%, but to kickstart germination, that needs to be around 45%.
But you don't just want to keep it underwater to get it to 45%, that wouldn't work because barley needs to breathe, it's living, it's a crop, so you would drown it.
Instead, they soak it for several hours, the exact time varies by season, then drain the water and let the grain rest for a while. Then repeat the process 2 more times.
You can see the aeration, so see how it looks really, really bubbly? That's because when the grain's in here, you have to aerate the steeps. So what's happening is a nice clean jacket. This is why you get filthy in a maltings. So you can take a wee bit and have a look at the grain. So this is it on its 3rd and final wet, so this is now getting up to the 45% moisture we like. You'll see it's looking bubbly. I think it smells quite sweet. Maybe I just get the whiff. You might not get that because you're beside the grain, Sam. Right, there you are. So what you're seeing is the grain, see when it's at this stage ready to go down, it's at a stage called, you'll just see the wee roots starting to come out, this little white, that's called the chit. C-H-I-T, the chit. And that's what you want, you have to be careful how you say it. But you want nice even growth, that's your chit. See if you look at some of these grains, let's just see. So you might get occasionally, see that there? that's come on too much. So that's just grown a wee bit much. But if you look at that, that's skinned. So that grain has lost its husk. And what happens is when it's like that, when you have grain that's got its husk, you've got a wee hole at the end of the grain called the micropyle, and that's where the water's taken up. But if you have skinning like that, the water uptake's much easier because it takes it in from all over the grain. And that's actually, you're seeing, that's probably a little bit too far on. And you don't want that, you want nice uniformity of the grain, which most of this is pretty uniform, which is good. We're we're steeping 50 tonnes, 25 tonnes in each steep, 50 tonnes a batch, 2 steeps fill 1 drum. So if you've got 50 tonne of grain, you're never ever going to get that all exactly at the same stage. It's a living product.
After the grain's hull is cracked, it's time to let nature do its work. But instead of spreading the grain onto a floor and shoveling it, they load 50 tons of damp grain into one of the 8 giant drums on the malting floor. Think of the drum as something like a giant clothes dryer, rotating slowly and turning the grain consistently while keeping the temperature right around 16 degrees Celsius, 61 degrees Fahrenheit.
You can hear just now that's fans whirring, and that's keeping it cool. Because you actually blow air, the floor's perforated, it's a bit like a kiln floor almost. The floor's perforated, the grain goes in, fills the drum about halfway. But if you were just to leave it in there, the heat, as that grew, would give off more and more heat. It's like a chain reaction, gives off more heat. The growth happens too quickly, it gets hotter and hotter, and the grain actually starts to sweat, and it goes sour. And oh, it's a horrible thing if you get a bad drum, really, you can't use them all.
103 hours, about 5 days later, the grain's ready to be dried. But it's not as simple as shoveling some peat into the ovens and firing up the kiln. That's because the phenols in the peat smoke are most effective when the grain is still damp. It takes around 26 hours for the grain to dry, but they'll only use the peat for the first 16 hours, while a fuel oil furnace provides the heat. Just like a good barbecue, the idea with the peat is low and slow.
The key thing is when you're burning peat, it's not flame. You don't want heat, you want smoke. It's all about the smoke.
Colin Gordon was a young boy when Port Ellen's distillery closed, but he understands why whiskey lovers come here.
I just sometimes like to come up here
and why they nose around the Maltings when it's only open for tours once a year during the annual Islay Festival each May.
One of our engineers who's done nearly 40 years service, his father was the last distillery manager at Port Ellen. So Douglas, who works here, has stories about going to the distillery and when the Maltings was built, because even when the Maltings was built 40 years ago, it's changed. They had a bigger crew, they had guys bag dust by hand, they loaded kilns by hand. So some of the stories are great, but I just think it's intertwined with the heritage and culture. This is an island that has such a rich distilling culture and so many distilleries for an island of 3,000 people. It's a great sense of pride. It's a brilliant sense of pride to come out and know, like I say, you'd be mad to build a Maltings here, but it's a great thing we have and it's a brilliant facility and it makes Islay what it is. There's a bit of us in everything on Islay pretty much distilling wise, so a great sense of pride.
For more Cask-Strength conversation on whiskies, with the people who make them and the people who drink them, join us each week for WhiskyCast. In Port Ellen, Scotland, I'm Mark Gillespie.